For nearly 70 years, the Soviet Union stood as a titan of the modern age. It rose from revolution, endured the terror of war, and rivaled the United States for control of the world. But in the late 20th century, the empire of Lenin and Stalin began to crumble. This is the story of how one of history's most powerful superpowers collapsed. Not with a sudden blow, but with a slow unraveling of its very foundations. After the turmoil of Stalin and Khrushchev, Leonid Brezhnev promised stability. And for a time, he delivered. The USSR projected strength abroad, but inside the system was rotting. Factories churned out obsolete products. Farms could not feed the nation. Citizens waited hours for bread, sugar, and meat. The promise of socialism had turned into a grim struggle for daily survival. This was the era of stagnation. The Soviet people lived in a frozen world, unchanged, unchanging, yet quietly decaying. The Soviet Union appeared strong, but its strength came at a terrible cost. Billions were poured into nuclear weapons, tanks, and space technology. In 1979, the USSR invaded Afghanistan, a war meant to secure influence, but which became its own Vietnam. Tens of thousands of young soldiers returned home in coffins. Meanwhile, the West surged ahead. American technology and capitalism pushed forward, while the Soviet system stood trapped in inefficiency. The gap widened. And the people knew it. When Mikhail Gorbachev rose to power in 1985, he was determined to save the system. His policies, perestroika, economic restructuring, and glasnost, openness, were bold experiments. For the first time in Soviet history, citizens could question authority without fear of the Gulag. Newspapers criticized officials. Artists challenged censorship. The Iron Curtain cracked open. But Gorbachev's gamble had a price. As freedom spread, so too did nationalism, frustration, and the demand for independence. What he hoped would save the Union began to tear it apart. In 1989, the storm broke. Across Eastern Europe, Soviet satellites rose against communist rule. In Poland, solidarity forced free elections. In Czechoslovakia, the Velvet Revolution swept away decades of dictatorship. In Hungary, borders opened to the west. Then, in November, the Berlin Wall fell. The symbol of communist power crumbled before the eyes of the world. For the Soviet Union, the empire it had built with tanks and blood was gone. Lost in a single year. As Moscow loosened its grip, the republics seized their chance. Lithuania declared independence. Soon, Ukraine, Georgia, and others followed. Each nation long suppressed by Moscow now demanded its own destiny. The Soviet Union was no longer a single state, it was a house divided, with its foundations shaking. In August 1991, desperate hardliners struck back. Communist officials launched a coup, determined to restore order. Tanks thundered through Moscow. Gorbachev was placed under house arrest. For 3 days, the fate of the USSR hung in the balance. But the people resisted. Crowds filled the streets, defying the coup. And then, one image defined the moment: Boris Yeltsin, standing atop a tank, calling for democracy. The coup collapsed in failure. But with it, so too did the last chance to save the Soviet Union. On December 25, 1991, the red flag with hammer and sickle was lowered from the Kremlin for the final time. The Soviet Union, once stretching across 11 time zones, ruling over nearly 300 million people, was gone. In its place stood 15 new nations, each uncertain, each scarred by the collapse of an empire. Russia, Ukraine, the Baltic states, and others stepped into independence, while ordinary citizens faced hunger, poverty, and chaos. The Cold War was over. But its shadow would haunt the world for decades. The fall of the Soviet Union was not a single event, it was a slow unraveling of ideology, economy, and faith. Born in revolution, sustained by power, it ended in dissolution. Yet its legacy remains. From the ashes of the USSR emerged a new world order, with new freedoms, new struggles, and new rivalries. The story of its rise and fall is more than history, it is a lesson on the fragility of empires, and on the human cost of power.